My name is Jay Burke. I'm the Director of Clinical Training for the BBS programs here, which includes the MA MFT program and then the MA Forensic program. Yeah, if you can go back to the
Sure, sorry. There we go.
So what we're going to be talking about is the process for pursuing dual licensure as both an LPCC and an LMFT. That's something that you are interested in doing. Now, this is meant to be just an introductory presentation, so this isn't meant to be in-depth. There's a lot of sort of nitty-gritty details that go into this. This is really just meant to be an introduction to what is involved in pursuing dual licensure, what the options are in pursuing dual licensure, to give you some perspective on if that's something that you may want to think about pursuing. So that's the goal for today. So first and foremost, just an overview of the LPC license. This may be a review for some of you, but just so we're all starting from kind of the same framework. But the LPC license, licensure law was passed in 2009 here in California. So prior to that, the LPCC license, was not available here in California. And then December 31st, 2011 was when the deadline passed to grandparent into the LPCC license. What that meant was that if you were already licensed as, let's say an MFT in California, you had the opportunity to quote-unquote grandparent into the LPCC license by completing some requirements. But once that deadline passed, as of January 1st, 2012, if you want to pursue the LPCC license in California, you now have to go through the formal process. And that's whether you're an LMFT, a registered intern, or an MFT trainee, you now have to pursue the license through the formal process, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But that's where we stand now. So whether you're in the room or on the phone, if you decide that you're interested in pursuing the PCC license here in California, you have to follow the full process, which again I'll talk a little bit more about. So that's a general overview. So the most basic question, I think, when you're looking at, okay, do I want to pursue both an LMFT and the LPCC license is you have to look at it as an individual decision. Might be the right decision for some. It may not be the decision that fits best for you. So some of the thoughts or recommendations as far as making that consideration, it can potentially increase your portability to another state. So there are some states where the LPC license is considered a stronger license than the MFT license. Just as in California, currently the MFT license is considered a stronger license than the LPC license. But if you're looking to move and you're aware of where you might potentially move, you want to check what the licensure requirements are in that state, which license carries a little bit more weight, which license has the most job opportunities, so on and so forth. So this is the first thing I tell students. If you know you may move at some point, check out the state that you're planning to potentially move to. Look at what licenses are offered in that state and which licenses carry the most weight, because you certainly want to put yourself in the best position should you decide to move. Additionally, licenses and certifications, having more of those, that can absolutely enhance professional opportunities. Having more letters at the end of your name looks more compelling, and you look more attractive and desirable as a candidate. So certainly pursuing additional licenses and certifications isn't a bad thing necessarily professionally. So that might be another incentive for doing it. This third one is actually probably, I think, the biggest incentive for pursuing the PCC license, the LPCC license here in California. So currently, and I'm very careful to emphasize currently because this will change, BBS has already made clear that they'll change this at some point, but currently you can double dip your MFT intern and your PCC intern hours and accrue them concurrently. So what that means is you can apply to the BBS for an MFT intern number and for a PCC intern number and accrue the hours at the same time, as long as your the work you're doing counts under both categories or both licenses. You could actually count the same hours for each license and have a supervisor sign off on both forms. That's where the nitty-gritty, where it gets a little more detailed because there are some requirements there. But in general, you can double dip your hours. So as someone, if you're going in and starting as an MFT intern, you might think, well, I might as well do the PCC intern hours at the same time since I can potentially double dip. So that's a really big incentive here in California, which will not be there forever. Right now, you can do that. And then finally, the LPCC license does have a differing emphasis than the LMFT license, and so that may be something that's attractive to you as well. is having a license that has a little bit of a different emphasis, if perhaps that's a better fit for your own clinical emphasis or plan. So this slide I actually borrowed from, we had somebody come from the California Licensed Professional LPCC organization. Really, I don't know if you were at that one. It was like 2 weekends ago. So somebody came and spoke about the LPCC license, and I liked this breakdown that they had in their PowerPoint. So they just gave some basic info. This is from the American Counseling Association, 2013, about each license and the number both nationwide and in California. So here you can see there's 126,000 LPC or LPCCs. You can see to the right there's a couple different abbreviations that are used for this license, but there's 126,000 nationwide, currently only 1,200 in California. So you can kind of see the disparity there. Licensed marriage and family therapists, there's 58,000 nationwide, so not as many LPCs, but about 37,000 of those are here in California. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into where the MFT emphasis is, which is here in California. Licensed clinical social workers, about 225,000 nationwide. You have 22,000 in California. And then licensed psychologists, over 154,000 nationwide, and you have 18,000 in California. But what I really wanted to highlight briefly was that top numbers. You get a sense here in California, LPC license is still very new. It's very young. There's not as many clinicians that are licensed as LPCs. However, nationwide, it's a very broad license, and it's a very strong license in a lot of other states. So that's something to take into consideration. What I have here is a comparison of the scope of practice for each license here in California per the BDS. A couple things I want to highlight. So you'll see in the first column for LPCCs that the emphasis is to deal adequately with life situations, reduce stress, experience growth, change behavior, make well-informed rational decisions. And then down in the second paragraph, you'll see that it talks about applying psychotherapeutic techniques. So that's considered the kind of scope for the LPC license. Now, if you look at the second column, which is the LMFT license, you'll see that we've emphasized that that license really looks at productive marriage and family adjustments. So hopefully just in that language, you see a little bit of a difference in the emphasis of that license, LPC looking at dealing adequately with life situations, MFT looking at productive marriage and family adjustments. Both in the second paragraph talk about using psychotherapeutic techniques towards that goal. So that's a commonality between the two. But there is a little bit of a difference in the emphasis in the license, and that's something that you want to be aware of. Here in California, I have to admit that the LMFT license tends to be a little bit of the catch-all license because it's been kind of the primary therapeutic license at the master's level in California. But if you go into other states, you'll actually find that there's actually a broader difference between the two, that the MFTs tend to really focus on marriage and family issues, whereas the LPCs tend to work primarily more at the individual level. So that's just one of the differences in the license that you may want to be aware of. So here's the certainly important information to know. So what are the education requirements attached to the LPC license? So here in California, it requires a master's or doctoral degree that is counseling or psychotherapy in content, and it needs to have at least 60 graduate semester units. If you are in the marriage and family therapy program here at the Chicago School, that does meet that requirement. Your program does have 60 units, and the degree does fit the requirement. The LPCC education requirements also include 13 core content areas that have to be covered. Here's a brief overview of those core content areas. I'm going to come back to that in a minute because this does have an impact on if you decide to pursue this license. But this is from the BDS document as far as what the core content areas are. And then an important note with all this is that an applicant for the LPCC license cannot be deficient in more than 3 of the required 9 areas of study. I think I should say 13. I need to update that. But you can't be deficient in more than 3 of the areas of study. I'm sorry for that typo. So it should say up to 3 may be completed at an accredited institution post-degree. So it used to be 2. They should change it to 3. And again, I'll talk about how that might affect MFTs in a minute. But this is just a broad overview of what those education requirements are. I guess I'll pause real quick. Any questions, Burley? Any questions online in the room with our one attendee? Does this make sense? Okay.
Let me double check here. Nope,
Right,
I don't have any
okay.
questions right now.
I guess we have to go back to PowerPoint. It won't let me advance. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so experience requirements. So the LPCC license does require a minimum of 3,000 post-degree hours of supervised clinical mental health experience under qualified supervision. The reason I highlight this is that most of you, especially if you're an MFT trainee, you know that a portion of the hours that you complete pre-degree will count towards your 3,000 hours required for licensure. The LPCC license does not allow you to count any of your pre-degree hours. So if you decide to pursue the PCC license here in California, you need to be aware that it'll require at minimum the 3,000 hours post-degree. So let's say you decide to pursue both the MFT license and the PCC license at the same time, and you did 500 hours during your MFT practicum. Potentially, you could start the licensure process as an MFT intern with about 500 hours already under your belt, needing to complete 2,500 more hours, and 3,000 hours needing to complete under the LPCC license because you can't count those practicum hours. So that's just something to be aware of. It is one of the limitations, or just one of the requirements, I should say, of the LPCC license. Experience needs to take place in at least more than 2 years, or cannot take place in less than 2 years of language to use in the ABS regulations. That's the same for MFTs. Also must include 280 hours of clinical experience during practicum. So this is another piece that I want to highlight. So the MFT degree at the Chicago School requires 250 client contact hours in order to complete the program, whereas the LPC MA Forensic program here requires 280 hours of practicum because that's a VBS requirement. So I have a few students who have already told me that they're interested in pursuing both licenses. I've advised those students then to aim for the higher number as part of their practicum hours to make sure they meet that requirement. So yes, it may only take 250 to graduate from the MFT program, but if you want eligibility for the LPCC license, then you should aim for the 280 to make sure that you meet that requirement as well. So that's something that they want to be aware of up front. And then, of course, after accruing hours, they have to pass the National Clinical Mental Health Counseling exam and the California Law and Ethics exam. Okay, so this is probably the most important piece to consider. So the potential missing coursework in experience. So there are classes that are missing from the MA MFT program that are required for the LPCC license. And the reason for that is because the MFT degree is meant to prepare you for the marriage and family therapy license, not the LPC license. So if you decide that you're interested in pursuing the LPC license in addition to the MFT license, there are some coursework, there's some coursework that you may have to make up. So one of those is the career development course. Now this is offered in the MFT program as a elective, and I believe most students end up taking it anyways. But I do tell students that if you're interested in pursuing the LPC license, you want to be sure to take the career development elective because that is one of the requirements for pursuing the LPC license. Another class is a crisis/trauma counseling course, which needs to be at least 3 units. That course, the crisis trauma counseling course, is not currently offered in the MFT program. I did work with the forensic department this past semester to make this class available to MFT students. So if this is something that MFT students are interested in taking, currently you have potential option of taking this in the MA Forensic program so that you meet this requirement. I do tell students you can do it now, or you could plan to complete it after you finish your degree, but this is a course that you'll need to take in order to pursue the LPC license. It needs to be at least 3 semester units. There also is a requirement for a 3 semester unit substance abuse treatment course. Now you'll see I have a note there that currently the MFT program offers a 2 unit version of this course. Again, that's to meet the MFT requirements. So same as I said above for the trauma crisis counseling course, I did work with the MA Forensic program, and I believe this course is actually being offered this summer, and there are a number of MFT students who are taking this course in the MA Forensic program because they offer it at the 3 unit level, and then they're going to transfer it into the MFT program. That way they meet that requirement. There is some discussion as well at some point in the MFT program, maybe in the future, changing the 2 unit to a 3 unit class, but that wouldn't affect current students. That would be down the road. But currently, if you're in the MFT program, you have the 2-unit course, but you'd be 1 unit shy of the 3-unit requirement. Now, I will say, I don't know if the BBS, let's say you apply for your PCC intern number, they might say, okay, you've done 2 units, so you only need to do 1 more unit, and then you can go find a 1-unit class somewhere. Or they could require that you redo an entire 3-unit class. I don't have any feedback from the DBS on how they're addressing that. I'll actually, really, have you heard anything?
I do not know. I do not know.
Yeah, so I've been telling students, if you want to go the safe route, take the 3-unit class. That way you know for sure you're meeting that requirement. Or you can do the 2-unit class in the MFT program, and then when you submit all your coursework, just wait and see what they say. They could say, hey, you need to do a 3-unit class, or they could say, well, you did 2 units, so you just need to do 1 more unit. And there are some different programs that, there's some online programs that you might be able to pick up the additional unit somewhere. But it's just something to be aware of. Finally, group counseling. So the LPCC program does require a 3-unit group counseling course. Similar to what I mentioned above, the MFT program currently offers this as a 2-unit course because that's the requirement for the MFT license. So if you are interested in pursuing the LPCC license, then this is something else that you need to look at as well, as you may need to take a 3-unit group counseling course, or at least anticipate that when you submit your coursework. If you take an MFT program, BBS could say, hey, you need to do 1 more unit in a group counseling class. Similar to above, I don't have feedback yet on which direction we'll go with that, but that is another requirement. And one other thing I want to mention with this is we're looking at the missing courses. Is you'll see here that right now there are 4 criteria that potentially a student could miss that are required for pursuing the LPC license. And if you remember a couple slides back, down there at the bottom where it says an important note, your degree cannot be deficient in more than 3 of the required core content areas. So I went back to mention that to say, if you're planning to pursue the LPC license, you need to make sure that you get at least 1 of these in your program. The easiest one is career development, because that is offered as an elective in the MFT program, and then you would simply have the other 3 content areas missing: the crisis trauma counseling, potentially substance abuse 1 unit, and group counseling 1 unit. But you do want to make sure that you don't have more than 3 core content areas that you need to remediate after your degree. Otherwise, that could potentially impact your ability to pursue the PCC license. So something I really wanted to mention and emphasize. And then, of course, as I said, you can potentially take the trauma counseling class and the substance abuse class currently in the MA Forensic program, which would be another way to try to address some of these, what they would call deficiencies now. Totally volitional, and that's totally up to you. There's no requirement for that. We just make that available as a courtesy for students. Okay, so finally, how do I pursue this? So first and foremost, after you graduate, you have to register with the BBS as a professional clinical counseling intern. This is the exact same thing that you'll do on the MFT side. You register as an MFT intern and begin accruing hours. Then second, you have to complete the 3,000 postmasters required practicum hours. I put a note here. Again, these hours can be completed concurrently while accruing MFT internship hours, as long as your site or placement meets the requirements. Then third, you complete the national PCC licensure exam, go through that process, and then, yeah, move towards getting licensed. Further resources, there actually is a guide to dual licensure that the CAMP organization put out. I have the link here in the PowerPoint. If you just go to the CAMP website and you just search for Guide to Dual Licensure, they should have a copy on there as a PDF that you can pull up. I thought that was very helpful. The version I have was last updated in 2012. I think, though, they have a newer version of it that's posted there. But to me, that's probably the best resource for looking at this. Of course, the DBS has information on there. All the forms and requirements are there. And then the California Association of Licensed Professional Counseling has actually become a really, really good resource. That's the organization that I mentioned came and spoke to the MA Forensic students, I think 2 weekends ago, about the LPC license, pursuing it in California, requirements, so on and so forth. So that's a really, really good organization to get connected with as well, if this is something that you think you may be interested in pursuing. Yep, so that's the end of my formal presentation. I'll certainly open it up, see if anybody has any questions either in the room or on the phone, any follow-ups from what I covered in the presentation.
Sure, and quickly while you are thinking of questions, I just want to remind everybody, actually I have one thing to ask first. If everyone can please, who's online, if you could please sign in virtually, send a message here with your name, just so we know who's online. And also, as you mentioned, CAMPT having resources, CAMPT is going to be doing a presentation here tomorrow from 12 to 1 p.m. I'm not sure if we're going to be if it's going to be all webinar or if we will have somebody here on campus, but from 12 to 1, CAMP will be here. So if you have more specific questions, you can ask them directly as well.
Yeah, I would encourage attending that if you can. I think any chance, any opportunity you have to talk directly with
yes.
CAMP is an opportunity I would take advantage of. I was at one of the consortium MFT meetings week before last, and we always have a CAMP person come, typically a CAMP representative, and we also had a representative from the BBS attend as well. And there's just something about having somebody in the room who works in that organization who can answer questions directly. I just found it to be really, really helpful. So we always, whoever the representative is, we always end up really picking their brain and asking lots of nitty-gritty questions that come up.
Yeah.
Because it's a good resource.
Yeah, it's a great resource. So here's our question. So the 280 hours in a hospital or community mental health agency are the requirement for trainee practicum or in general for internship posts?
So I think you're asking about the 280 hours. So those are for practicum. So the LPCC license requires 280 hours of direct client contact as part of the practicum experience in order to be even eligible for the LPCC license. That's the practicum requirement. The 3,000 hours then are required during internship.
Okay, do we have any other questions in the room or questions from the cyber universe? Anybody?
Yeah, I have a question. So with the additional coursework that's needed, within the MFT program, there are a couple of those courses that we only get 2 credits for. And you showed the other slide where it said that you might be able to be deficient in those. Does that mean that you could potentially still qualify for the licensure, or no?
Well, so it's interesting. So we submitted our the MAMFT degree program to the BBS back in 2012, and they evaluated our program. There's actually a letter on the BBS website that says these are the deficiencies that the student needs to meet in order to be license eligible. I think that letter pertains to the 48-unit program, not the new 60-unit program, because it did mention like research methods was missing, which is a core class in our 60-unit program. But I think it was for the 48-unit program. But the reason I mentioned that is there was nothing on there about group counseling. And I think in the 48-unit program, when I remember, I think group counseling was only 2 units. So it was interesting to me that didn't. There were a couple classes that I thought would show up as requirements that didn't. So that left me to wonder, okay, when the BBS was evaluating our MFT curriculum, were they just going off of course names, or were they potentially looking at other classes and saying, well, that may meet this criteria, so we're going to count this over here and this over here. The reality is we don't know what BBS is going to say, what they're going to do. So my advice is always to go off of what is printed in the BBS laws and regulations and aim to fulfill that. Whether they look and say, oh, this class, you know what, it counts for this requirement, I don't know. But I do know that like group counseling currently in the 6-unit program is 2 units. They're asking for 3. So if you don't want to pursue completing the 3 units now, like let's say, I don't know, have you already taken group counseling? Because I know I talked to some students who had already done it, and they're like, well, I've already taken my class, I'm not going to redo it. I said, well, then make sure you don't have more than 3 deficiencies overall. Submit to the BBS and see what they say. Because they can come back and they don't say anything about that. And then it's, well, don't do any extra work that you don't need to. What I do advise is make sure you're not more than 3 deficiencies. Because then you don't want to, if that's something you want to do, you don't want to be ineligible out the gate. Yeah. So based on my understanding, and really I certainly welcome your feedback too, as long as you take that career development elective, that does only, you should be okay, because you'll have potentially up to 3 other deficiencies based on their review, based on what they say. And it might even be to your benefit, because they could come back and say, for like group counseling, yeah, you know what, you only need to do 1 more unit, which is a lot better than them saying you need to do a whole other 3-unit class. So some ways it's almost kind of a benefit to wait and see what they say, so that you're not doing more than you need to do.
Yeah, or paying for extra courses that you may not need to take.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, do we have any other questions out there? I don't see any others that have come in. Okay, well, if you do have questions, I'm hoping that you can see that Jay's email is down there. Always the best resource to go to is the board directly. And I always encourage people to, if you have questions for the board, to email them so you can get an answer back in writing. You might not always be successful with that, but at least then you have something in writing. And once again, we have a great resource here tomorrow. The representative from camp will be here.
Yeah, that's actually, I wasn't initially thinking about that, but that might be a great avenue to ask camp about what their experience is with interns, MFT interns who decide to pursue to become PCC interns as well.
Yeah, and this is something new, too.
It's
so
new for all of
so.
us. And you have to remember that the PCC license didn't open up for this sort of traditional licensure for the 3,000 hours. It opened up in January 2012. So, we're in the part of the life cycle where it's really only been in the last year or so that people have been meeting the 3,000 hour requirements and actually submitting for the license. So a lot of this is just really recent and really new. And so talking with somebody from camp would probably be a great idea to find out what are they hearing from the quote-unquote front lines. What are they hearing from people who are applying for this? Are they having any other barriers that maybe we're not aware of, or issues that are coming up that we're not aware of? I would bring that to camp and say, hey, fill us in.
I'm sorry. We had one more question here, Jay.
Okay.
That was, so just a confirmation that for the hours, it'll be 280 hours plus the 3,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
280 and then
Well,
plus 3,000 on top of that. Really minimum, because then you have to make sure you're meeting your supervision ratio and other things. So, it depends on, they could ask for more. But yes, 280 plus 3,000 minimum. Whereas for the MFT license, it's whatever you accrued in practicum up to there's a ceiling on that, but your practicum hours, up to the 3,000.
Yeah, apply towards that 3,000.
Yeah, apply for the 3,000.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Jay. And that's it. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks for everybody for attending.